Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Write an Adventure, our ongoing stream where we are creating a campaign in real time, all from scratch, so that you can see all the steps and ideas and thought processes that go into into my method for writing campaigns. I'm RJ Kerr. I'm your host as always, and today we are going to be working on our sea shanty siren adventure, or well, technically it's more of a complex social encounter as opposed to what we might consider a full-blown adventure. Um, but before we do that, let me give you a little update on where we are in case you haven't seen some of the previous videos or you're watching the recording of this and haven't been caught up, so that you're not lost. We are working on building a completely unique campaign, totally from scratch, including an original domain of dread. And we've done a lot of work on that already. We've already decided that we're using the story circle structure to organize our campaign. Uh, the um, uh, Lost my train of thought there. We've already used the story structure system to organize the steps of our campaign to sort of guide this narrative arc, so that we have a complete story in here, and we know we have all the vital parts of that. We have figured out how our characters are going to enter into this domain of dread through a portal that opens up on the Blood Moon. We've talked about kind of motivations would draw them in through this portal. We figured out where they're going to land in a shanty town called Darkport that sits on the edge of an inland sea. And we figured out this inland sea is a pretty big deal in this domain of dread. That it was once the basin of a thriving civilization that's now fallen into ruin and flooded. We've also figured out that this domain contains the Dreadlord Ovander, an elemental evil whose role in this campaign is still nebulous to us at the moment. We're still figuring out exactly where this entity fits in and how. We have created the very first adventure for our characters, where they are kidnapped and briefly enslaved and have to escape their captors, in an effort to free themselves. And in doing so, they discover the existence of a long lost artifact and learn that this artifact offers the wielder a modicum of power over the domain of dread itself, meaning that finding this artifact and taking possession of it is their best bet for escaping this domain of dread alive. And now we're working on a larger part of the campaign where the characters get out of the world, get proactive, and start looking for this artifact. And this gives them a lot of player agency. They've got a lot of opportunity to explore the world and follow clues. And to make this possible, we're using a node structure style in which we have placed sort of scattered clues all around the world in different locations. We can define as nodes, or we can define these as investigative scenes. And the idea is the characters find one or more of these clues and are able to follow it to this next node or this next investigative scene and find more clues there and continue on. Uh, and eventually leading to the artifact itself. And this, like I said, gives the players a lot of agency. They can choose which clues to follow up with, which clues to ignore. They find some of the clues, not all the clues. They have lots of routes they can take to the final solution, which is great for them, but makes things a little complicated for us as DMs. And so this structure, this node structure, allows us to really capture that total player agency while still giving us some structure to write with, so that we can create adventures and interactions and investigative moments and social encounters that we can sprinkle around the world, already have prepared, not have to come up with all this stuff on scratch, from scratch, off the top of our heads as we go. So we've done a couple of these nodes already. We've done one with a 5-room dungeon. We've done one that's a heist style using the 5-scene dungeon methodology. And now we're working on one that is less of a fully fledged adventure and more of a complicated, I won't say complicated, that sounds bad, a complex social encounter. So a social encounter with a lot of levels that requires some strategic play. Um, you could, of course, write this as another 5-room dungeon. You could do any other kind of methodology for it, but since we're here and we're trying out different stuff, we decided to go with this particular style that focuses less on game mechanics and more about the uh, uh, the characters themselves, the non-player characters themselves, and how the player characters, can interact with them. So, without any further ado, let me go ahead and share my screen, and we will jump into things with one final reminder. that this is an interactive live stream, and I look forward to your input. So please, as you have ideas, thoughts, opinions, feelings, concerns, ideas, you have anything else you want to chat about, jump into the chat. Toss that stuff out there. You guys come up with some incredible stuff as we're running through this. Some of the most original ideas that I think we've put into this campaign so far have come from you all, and I just love the interaction we get from you guys. So don't be shy. Jump in there with your thoughts and suggestions. So that said, let's go ahead and continue where we had left off. So, as I said, we are working on a complex social encounter, and we've defined that we have this siren who's not by nature a predatory creature and that she lures beings to her toll and feasts on them. However, she's recently developed a problem of another kind. The siren, she needs. She needs to steal someone's voice and wants the characters to do it for her. And so she has a few special requirements to this voice. And so she's narrowed it down to a selection of 3 potential people. And so what we've done is we've kind of given ourselves a rough outline to work with here. But we've started focusing in on the personalities of these NPCs, really kind of trying to understand them as a whole so that when it comes time to have dynamic, unpredictable conversations with them, we have some guidelines, some things to help us as the DM kind of guide how these characters are going to interact with the player characters. And so we worked on our siren. We gave her an objective, which is what she wants right now. We gave her an ambition, which is what she wants overall. We gave her a couple values that, while they can be aligned, but they can also come into conflict. We gave her a secret, something that the players might be able to discover and leverage in their conversations with her. And then we gave her a little bit of a description so that we've got something to roll with when we introduce her to the characters. The From her objective, we defined our quest here since she's our leading NPC in this. And that quest is, she wants to claim a new voice to replace the one that was taken from her. So we decided I actually think you guys came up with this idea, but that it would be much more fun if the characters couldn't just steal the voice. They had to be willingly given. And so we decided that meant that the player characters needed to interact with these NPCs in a really dynamic way that wasn't just mechanically or sneaking in or opening up a magic device or something like that. They had to convince one of these NPCs to willingly give up their voice. And to do that, then again, it becomes a complex social encounter, a dynamic social encounter. And so we built out a lot about these NPCs. So again, as DMs, we have a lot of fodder to work with. We've got a lot of things to kind of base this decision on. So it doesn't boil down to just a quick, hey, all right, make a persuasion check for me. Oh, you got 18? Fantastic. Yeah, they go, sure, you can have my voice, no problem, because that's not satisfying or realistic. So we gave them names, we gave them locations, another opportunity to do some world building here. You guys created those, the location names. These are towns that didn't previously exist in our Domain of Dread. We're going to have to fill those out. We gave each one a dilemma, and so a reason that they might want to give up their voice, but a reason why they also might not want to give up their voice, and made those conflicting. We gave them objectives, things that they want immediately, ambitions, things they want over time, values, core values that kind of guide most of their decisions. What's the most important thing to them? We gave each of them a secret. We also went in and figured out a clue that the characters might be able to come across to learn this secret prior to or during the interaction. And we didn't make these clues easy to find. We made these things the characters are really going to have to put some thought into searching around for. And then, of course, we gave these characters a description. We were pretty thorough on a lot of these, including building out a deity for the priest here and that sort of thing. I will say that, when I'm running an adventure like this, when I'm introducing these NPCs, I will frequently not start with just introducing this block of text. Where we talk about it's a youngish man who's dressed in extremely bright clothes. It stands out in otherwise dour region, and his clothes are threadbare in some places, and yada yada yada. Yeah, I will usually give the first impression that an NPC delivers, and so in this case, he's a youngish human who dresses in extremely bright colors that stands out in otherwise dour region. That's a good first impression. It's something that the characters would notice right away. And then as they get closer and they do some more examining of him and they interact with him, then I would drop in some of these other details about his clothes being threadbare in some places, having much been repaired, and that he's very young and unworldly. They might notice those sorts of things. But by giving ourselves these toys to play with, these tools to use while we run the game, we set ourselves up for success. So we did that for all three characters, and now we are working on a complication or a twist, or multiple complications and twists that we might be able to toss out here for success or failure, or just to make things kind of a little more interesting, as opposed to again just some straight conversations. Um, so we actually, throughout all this, developed a reputation tracking system to figure out how the characters' actions influence their reputations in various towns throughout this domain of dread, and came up with a pretty decent list of pros and cons for for being well known, for notoriety, being held in a positive light and being held in a negative light, and effectively becoming famous or infamous, as it were. Um, and so this is actually something that we're going to pull out of this section of the adventure, and we're going to make it a more universal uh, rule, a special mechanic, as if you will, here. That way we can use this in all of our different settlements, and we can just create a few unique things for the various settlements that these NPCs are in, specifically Flotsam Point, Salt Haven, and Sodden Earth. Um, so why don't we go ahead and fix that now? So we're going to say um, reputation tracking, and we're going to copy this. Ba-bum. Okay, and we're going to copy all this real quick here, because some of these are our notes, and other parts of these are more important, or more definitional. So we're going to put that over here. We're not going to worry about cleaning that up right now. We just want to have it in so it's easy to find and easy to reference. So again, when we run these adventures, it's a place we can easily jump back to. This right here, this block is kind of rough notes for us because we talked about maybe some settlement specific setbacks, which what we'll probably end up doing is writing those out and linking them to the specific settlements that we have over here. That way, again, they're easy to find as we run the game. Cool. But we finished that last time. So let's go back and talk about some other complications. And let's fine tune what we wrote here, because we have encounter failure. If the PCs fail to convince an NPC to accept the terms of the Siren's contract, the NPC begins spreading the word of their nefarious deal. And it says this threatens to make them pariahs and prevent them from making further deals unless the NPC is silenced in some capacity. And so we're going to say, let's see here, the PC's reputation falls by 1.24 hours after failure, unless the PCs do something to mitigate this. Cool. Yeah, so this way we have a mechanical, because we do want some mechanics in here to make it easy for us, but we have a mechanical solution to this, makes it nice and simple, and we put in kind of a caveat there that the characters could do something. The characters could if they could murder that NPC and silence them from talking. They could bribe them. They could kidnap them. They could do all kinds of wild and crazy things that might affect this. And so we put this little caveat in here to remind us that might affect the overall outcome. Okay, it looks like we've got few comments in the stream here, mostly highs and hellos. And then Fantasy Animal Vegan says complication of runny nose with a dry cough. Illness. Okay, that brings up an interesting point here. I do like to use illness as a complication in things sometimes. I don't think it's a perfect fit for this particular adventure here, but one of the things that I will frequently do is when I'm running adventures and I'm having characters account for living expenses and that sort of thing, which I do a fair amount because I think it's important for them to have something to spend their gold on, and it creates some choices as to sort of how their character might be perceived. If they're staying in lush royal quarters all the time because they have the wealth, well, they might be seen as wealthy in town, and that might have certain social advantages and certain social disadvantages. For example, being able to gain access to a higher to the nobility or to a higher tier of merchants, or getting interviews or what have you, that kind of thing. But also making them more likely to be the target of theft, that kind of deal. But I will do the inverse sometimes, and I'll say that if they're living in squalid or poor conditions, I sometimes will make characters make Constitution saving throws to see if they pick up any of the kind of diseases that run rampant through those places um, while they're there. What is it? Sewer fever, I think, is what it's called. Is uh, the one of my favorite ones to use because it's out of the 2014 players DMG 2014 DMG, and it's a great one. It's kind of a general sort of, you've been bitten by vermin and now you're sick kind of thing. Um, Easy to get rid of potentially with access to things like magic, but it uses up resources and it reminds players that there are real world consequences to living in squalor. That they're not just saving money by living in poverty; they're putting themselves at risk, which is a reality. Um, Ben Elder says perhaps if they have discovered the secret of each NPC, blackmail could be an option. Absolutely, it could be an option. In fact, that is um, the. Sorry, Ben Elder just said, "How did your last character die? Dysentery." Yeah, yeah, man. Learn from the Oregon Trail. That's what I'm telling you, brother. Like, um, you know, I I'm gonna go on a quick tangent here, and I promise I will come back. But a story of I was running a Ghost of Saltmarsh game at one point, and I had a character who was uh, just a player who was very much didn't want to engage with the economy, so didn't want to engage with the whole I have to pay for living expenses and that kind of deal. And so he's just like, okay, I live in the sewers. I just live in the sewers, and he got he got sick all the time in that game because of course you would if you were living in filth all the time, so that you didn't have to pay expenses. He didn't like that very much, but I thought it was very realistic. Anyway, the uh, back to your point here, Ben. Perhaps if they have discovered the secrets of the end of each NPC, the PCs could blackmail them, and yeah, and that's precisely why I would want secrets in the game here, is it gives them another social lever to achieve their goals. Perhaps not one that's going to make them all feel very comfortable, but again, we end up in this moral quandary sort of situation, right? Where you're going to have the players at your table debating whether or not their characters would go along with things like blackmail or threatening or extortion or kidnapping or any of that kind of stuff to achieve their ends, which makes for cool role play moments, and it creates these situations at your gaming table where you know you're there's no obvious solution, right? There's no clear cut choice without consequences, which makes the choice so much harder and so much rewarding when it turns out to be the right one, or so much more devastating when it turns out to be the wrong one. Really adding complexity to the game. Um, I will again be honest with you. I for a long time really worried that when players kind of quote unquote failed on these choices, they picked the wrong choice, they picked one that had the most negative consequences, that they were going to be upset by how the game turned on them for a little while and the consequences of those actions. I really worried that was going to be the case, and I will say that after running 10 years of 5.e and playing this game for 30 years, what I've discovered is that no, people love it when there are consequences. Uh, because the game becomes so much more dynamic and so much realer. Now they have more that they've got to tackle, more things to consider, and and it just adds another level of realism. It adds another layer of challenge to the game, and it becomes no longer ends up in a situation where they're just doing the same thing over and over and over again. They've got to try new tactics, and they've got to expand the repertoire and do cool and crazy stuff to try to get out of these situations. Um, so, um, so, let's continue before I continue too deeply into my diatribe here. Um, uh, Phantom, sorry, Fantasy Animal Vegan says, Ben, have your characters since become obsessed with hand washing and food prep in regard to how the last character died with dysentery? Ben Elder, indeed. Hero's Feast is a godsend, literally. At what, 300 gold pieces a pop? Yeah, sure. It's awesome. Okay, all right. I digress. So let's talk about some more complications. We've got one here in terms of counter failure, what could occur. But let's talk about what happens in terms of encounter success. Because failure is in many ways inherently interesting, right? Because you haven't achieved, you've got to do something else, you've got to change tactics, you've got to try again. But success is not always inherently interesting. Because if you just win and you go, oh, well, I guess we won, let's carry on. And we might as well, go, oh, you succeeded, you got somebody's voice, let's time skip to you're back at the siren and you're getting exactly what you want. Because unless we put something interesting in that, in what happens in between, there is unlikely to be anything interesting in that space. Unless your characters decide to make things interesting all on their own, which they totally can do and can be a lot of fun. But we don't want to depend on that. So we want there to be some kind of twist in the case of encounter success. So if things go right from the jump, they go to the priest right away, and they convince the priest to give up his voice. And now they got this voice. They got the signed contract. They're ready to go back to the siren. Everything's turning up roses, coming up roses. What is going to make this difficult? What's going to make this more dynamic? What's going to surprise the players? And so we want to come up with something that could happen. And sometimes this is a little more challenging because it's not always an obvious thing as might occur with an encounter failure. Ben says, would it be a good idea if they had a very special reward if they managed to get all 3 voices? Yeah, you can absolutely do that. Certainly nothing wrong with that. It becomes a little bit of a fetch quest in that regard. But then again, this is already kind of a little bit of a fetch quest, which again is, gets a bad rap, right? Fetch quest is a foundational thing for a lot of adventures, that you're going and getting something. So I don't want to use that in sort of a derogatory kind of way. It would just depend on what you were trying to achieve for them. If you want to give them a special reward for doing that, and now she's got all these voices you can use, the siren has all these voices you can use, awesome. We can totally do that. And that makes it relatively simple in terms of adding a little complexity, but it also runs the risk of repetition, right? They got to do this one thing 3 times, which sometimes gets boring. And so you may end up with a couple characters or a couple players that are like, yeah, let's go for all 3 of them because we want the cool special thing. And you might end up with a couple players that are like, no, we don't want to do this. We've already done this. Let's move on to something else. And so while you do get some conversation and quote unquote conflict at the table, it's not always the good conflict when you repeat yourself like that. Which again, not necessarily a bad thing. You can work with some groups, others ones it wouldn't work for. It's really going to come down to your table and how that functions, if that'll work well for you. Either way, since we don't know who we'd be playing with this in the adventure, and because we're kind of trying to play around with different things, let's try to come up with some complications for successful well, some complications for success to make things a little more dynamic on the back end of this. Um, you know, think in any kind of good story, the the characters are about to complete. They get the thing that they want, and they're about to um, and they're about to succeed, and then there's something that happens that gets in their way and blocks them for a little while. I mean, that happens in every movie, that happens in every book, that happens in stories, every myth and legend in the world, specifically because it's good storytelling and it works in the way that our brains work. So let's try to figure something else for that. We've got a couple more suggestions here. We've got Orth says, if you had to go to the siren 3 times encounter wise, that would be really funny. Yeah, by the third time, you again. What are you here for? Like, uh, he goes on to say, first time reluctant to give what the party needs. Second time neutral. Third time the siren is begging the party to take what they want and leave. Yeah, like just go away. I'll give you whatever you want. Just get out of here. I love Benworth. That's funny. Ben Elder says, perhaps someone close to the one you succeed with finds out what they have done and tries to stop the party, maybe alerting the guards or uh, criminals to stop them getting to the siren. Yeah, 100%. We could do something along those lines. The the local hero, as it were, intercedes, because that is another cool. That's another really cool moral quandary here, um, because let's be honest, the player characters, are probably not the good guys in this particular interaction. They're you know they're morally gray at best in this situation. They're taking someone's voice for their own gain. And sure, that person may be getting something in return, but it's you know this isn't a big shiny white knight moment. Um, so having somebody in town that objects to this and can get things moving uh, to obstruct the characters um, is a really cool thing to do. So I like that idea a lot. I think that that's something that we should run with here. Ben goes on to say maybe it turns into a chase where they have to get out of town. Absolutely, it could. I think the chase mechanic gets underutilized in a lot of D&D games. I'm a big fan of it. It takes a little bit of practice to kind of really smooth out how you're going to run it, just because it's a little bit different from a lot of other things in the game. But it's still a really good one. I like it quite a bit. Um, and it would add a little bit of variety to this encounter because we've done a lot of social interaction stuff at this point. At this point, the player characters will have done a lot of talking. They will have done a lot of negotiation, investigation, and a lot of things that don't necessarily require dice rolls. Uh, and they're probably going to be itching to get into some of the mechanics of the game here, either itching for a good fight or itching for a good chase or itching something that has a little more tension and drama to it, um, that kind of gets the blood pounding. So let us do something like that. Um, so what we're going to say here then is success is not secret. Those, yeah, I don't want to. Success is not secret. Those close to the NPC who gave up their voice learn quickly of the deal, with some among them objecting to its terms. They seek to stop the PCs and steal back the contract which binds their friend's voice. Cool. So now we have the opportunity to make this unique to each NPC. So let's do that. Let's say Bard TBD. Let's say Priest TBD. And then we'll say Widow TBD. Okay. Because obviously it's not going to be the same person in each case, and so it probably isn't fitting to just kind of come up with a general NPC that kind of fills all of the categories for each. I think we can make this a little unique to each one and make make the consequences perhaps similar but different enough that they're flavorful. Um, um, Jonathan Frost says, it's encounters like this where I lament how alignment has fallen into the background. And for 5e, alignment should be an important factor when player undertakes tasks like this. I will be honest, I disagree. I am not a huge fan of alignment to the point where, like, even in 3.5, I did not make characters choose alignments when I ran games. I think that the alignment system is great for NPCs in times where you're not giving them any other detail, right? Like you have generic goblin and he is lawful evil. Cool. You have an idea of how he's going to behave. You have generic dragon who is chaotic good. You have an idea of how they're going to behave. But I think that with player characters, alignment unnecessarily curtails the options that they have. I think that the actions that they take in game determine their alignment as opposed to their alignment determining the actions that they can take in game, personally. So one of the things that I do is when I'm thinking about things as being good or evil or what have you, is I just kind of keep a loose running tally for my characters in my games as to the kinds of things that they're doing that are positive and the kinds of things they're doing that are negative. And if they do things that are if they're doing things that are more frequently evil, then they are evil characters. They're doing things that are more frequently good, then they're good characters. Same thing goes for lawful and chaotic and that kind of deal. And this is a much more loose interpretation of that, but there isn't as many moments where we have specified conditions that affect only the evil, only the good. And so it can be a little bit looser, but you can still have those consequences in there. And I think it makes for more interesting storytelling too when you have a character who starts out one way and then becomes something else, which is not impossible to do with the alignment system. But I think that it didn't encourage those kinds of redemption arcs and some of those stories. That's my 2 cents on that. Let's see here. Ben Elder says, for the priest, I would say he declares to the town that the NPCs are servants of a monster and gathers a mob to enact the lady's justice or try to burn the party at the stake. Yeah, that would make sense to me if if there's an encounter failure there, potentially. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, that could be a unique failure in terms of in terms of if they fail here, inciting the priest's ire. If they succeed, the priest is getting something he wants. Theoretically, he can be bummed out about it, can have buyer's remorse. But the idea of him, turning the town against them is, I think, is less likely. But it does raise the question that we perhaps come up with some unique circumstances for failure as well. So let's see here. Let's see here. Should let's say in addition, the following location specific setbacks also occur. And then we come up with a couple of these for these. So let's say the priest is priest decries the PCs as heretics. How did I misspell that? Oh, because there's an E in unne. The priest describes the PCs as heretics and raises a mob of the faithful to apprehend them. That means we're going to have to figure out what a mob of the faithful looks like at this point. And it also undercuts some of the point buy system here, or some of the point system for the reputation. But because they're gonna, but it also means they're gonna have to stay out there for a little while before things cool off. But they may not come back. It's something to consider. I don't want to get rid of it yet. I think that there's certainly some value in that. Some dramatic moments to failure is very good. But we want to think about how we're going to handle that mechanically too. Let's see here. Let's say, so let's come back to success here because we've already got a little bit for failure. Let's come back to success. And so let's talk about Bard, Priest, Widow. What happens? Who gets in the way if the players succeed? I could imagine there being I could imagine there being an acolyte of some kind, or a subordinate to the priest who learns this and feels that it's their calling to stop the PCs who were clearly making a devil's bargain or something along those lines. So let's say the priest's acolyte becomes aware of the bargain and decides the PCs are doing the work of a devil. They must be stopped. Ooh. What if it's not the priest who raises a mob? What if it's the acolyte? Then that does work for us to have that as our downside here. So as our downside is success, because maybe it's not, maybe the priest is level-headed and even, but you have this sort of firebrand acolyte who is, who no longer restrained by the words of the priest, feels it's their duty to kind of go high and right on this and take a big move. And then that means that we can, that means that we can really kind of the bargain decides that means we can really have a really kind of dynamic moment that say, let's get out of town here. So let's capture that real quick. It must be stopped. He raises an angry mob to stop the to confront the PCs and attempts to have them burned at the stake. And we'll come up with the mechanics for that later, but that's a cool little storytelling thing. I think that's really awesome. So that works really well. Cool idea, Ben. Very cool. Um, let's see here. Ben Elder says on other things here, maybe for failure, the widow turns on the party and the ghost of her love attacks them. Other maybe dark around, she tells them to come back. When they do, they find a note saying she's sorry and a trail leading to a pair of shoes at the cliff's edge. Yeah, shoe prints maybe at the cliff's edge, but not a fight. Not a fight, but a moral blow to the party. Yeah. You can absolutely do that. Um, I to your next point where it says where you say again a bit dark unless covered in session 0. Yeah, so definitely if there's going to be self harm and suicide that kind of stuff, you want to cover that stuff in session 0. But it doesn't mean that you can't do it if your players are okay with that kind of stuff happening in the game. And that could be a really good one in terms of um, the moral sort of the moral impact they would have on the players. My only concern with that is that it's a little antithetical to um, the widow's bond of family because she has kids. Um, Not necessarily though to her soulmate, where she wants to be close to them no matter what. So I don't know I don't know that suicide would be a hard sell on that, but it might be a more difficult sell for the characters there. Um, I like the idea of getting the ghost involved because again, that plays into that soulmate thing too, right? Because maybe the ghost doesn't want, maybe the ghost of her spouse doesn't want her to give up her voice. Maybe they're okay with their bones resting far away if it means that their loved one doesn't have to endure this tragedy. Um, uh, oh, Ben just got even darker. Maybe there are little shoes next to hers. Oh, oh. Yeah. Again, you'd have to make sure harm to children is something that's okay in your campaign. But you could do that, and that's kind of stuff would hit heavy and hit really hard. I generally don't allow harm to children in my games, just because it's a line for me. I'm not a big fan of it. But you absolutely, if you're playing that kind of game, you could do it. There's certainly, um, if you're trying to hit something that's as dark as like Curse of Strahd, that absolutely is a realistic thing to work in there. Um, uh, if we want to work the kids into this, which we absolutely could do, your idea about there being the cliffside route and that kind of deal here um, is, maybe it's the kids who find out that their mom can't talk anymore, and they're pissed off about it. And maybe the route out of town in this place goes along the cliff, and so the characters are gonna have to follow this ridge, and the kids, try to push them off the cliff effectively. Try to enact their own sort of revenge, and so so the players end up in a situation where the enemy is a group of angry children who are trying to defend their mother. Kind of, if you want to hit that sort of that moral note without the self harm implications there, potentially, you could do that. Um, you know, you could even get a little goofy with it and make it a Home Alone kind of deal thing where they've set all kinds of like little traps for the party, and so like the party is having to negotiate this whole Home Alone, Rube Goldberg machine of traps that are trying to knock them off the cliff face here that these kids have set up. Again, it just depends on the kind of adventure you're trying to run here and how light or dark you want things to be. Um, I will say that if you're gonna do really dark stuff in a campaign, and you can, there's nothing wrong with that if your players are down for it. Make sure you also put moments of lightness in there. There's a reason that horror movies have a lot of jokes, and it's because you want to lighten that tension periodically. Because if you don't, then your players are going to get numb to it, and they're no longer going to feel the sort of the moral impact that you're trying to hit home with, because everything is deeply morally gray and bleak and black. You want there to be moments of light and levity in there as well to kind of break that up. Um, so, uh, Orth says, "What if that scenario is to make the party think that someone kidnapped the widow?" Hmm. Yeah, you could go that way. The only the only trouble I have with some of this too, because one challenge of this, if the widow is fakes her own kidnapping or even fakes her own death or really does die or what have you, is that this is supposed to be success, right? This is the characters get what they want, they get the voice, and they can't necessarily do that if she goes missing, right? Um, so uh, I think the best one to go with here, the one that I like the most, is the ghost getting involved in this, because I think that sort of speaks to the theme of forlorn love that we've kind of working into this, um, and uh, which is kind of which is kind of the story we're trying to tell with this widow here. So of course, that means the players try to get rid of this ghost before they interact with the widow. They've circumvented this. But then again, that's good tactics on their part, so they should be rewarded for circumventing this. So yeah, I think we stick with the ghost. Um, uh, let's hear. Ben Elder says, "I like the kids trying to attack the party." Thanks. I think that could be a cool idea too, depending on the story you want to tell. I really like the ghost idea for this one though, so I think that's the one we're going to start with here. Um, and She says, slings and small crossbow bolt lash out at you. What do you do? Yeah, absolutely. You can put the players in that kind of situation, for sure. And it could be a real moment of pathos in the game. But I'm gonna run with the ghost on this for the time being. I think that is a cool one, and we've already kind of worked that ghost into the story, so it it makes sense for it to show up again. Okay, so the ghost of the widow's spouse learns. I don't need a comma there. Learns of the widow's bargain and comes to their true love's aid. They attempt to attack. Ooh. What if they attempt to possess a party member? Possess a PC and they attempt to possess a PC and confront the party as a whole, resorting to violence if need be in order to void the contract and return the voice to the widow. Let's see here. Jonathan Frost says, "What if they attempt to possess one of the kids?" Again, you can absolutely do that. If you want to pull the kids into the scenario here, and yeah, and I mean, you could have them try to possess the kids again. To me, that doesn't. I don't particularly like that from a storytelling standpoint, for two reasons. One is that if we're kind of telling the story of true love, right, of this loving couple, it would stand to reason they also love their kids, and so this ghost wouldn't necessarily want to possess one of their children to put their child in harm's way, right? Um, yeah, if we're telling a different kind of story, that's we absolutely could kind of do that. The second thing is that frankly, I don't particularly like writing adventures that put kids in mortal danger. Um, so I don't really want to do that. So I'm not going to. That's just a personal preference here. That hits a little close to home for me, and I don't want that. But you can run games where that happens. There's nothing wrong with that, so long as there's, everybody at the table is cool with that. Um, let's see here. Do, 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 do. Ben Elder says, I like the idea that after the voice has given up to you, I'll step outside in a waterlogged coffin with coral growing on it, the bones of a tiefling. Uh, if the love is a tiefling as well. Yeah, 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 yeah. That could be cool. That could be very cool. Mr. Max says the ghost possesses the widow to attack, and she begins to speak, but it's the ghost voice coming out of her. You could do that too. Um, the the reason that I personally prefer to have, and this is again this is something unique to Ghost. So this is kind of a fringe case kind of thing. Since Ghost can possess any character, right? Potentially, I prefer them to try to possess party members, um, especially if we're working towards a fight, because one of the rules of possession is that the ghost cannot be harmed while they're inside this creature. So if you have them possess either a party member or an NPC that the characters are attached to, they're going to come up with ways to try to not harm the host. But if uh, the um, but if it's a an NPC that they have no special bond with, so for example, unless they become really attached to this widow emotionally, which they absolutely could, but they might not. Uh, and you might they might just have no problem with slaughtering this widow, because the ghost was in her and they attacked us, and we just defended ourselves, and so you don't end up with any of the additional conditions that would turn a simple, straightforward combat into something that's a little more interesting. That would force them to think kind of outside the box and come up with cool solutions, thus making it a more dynamic sort of setback. Um, let's see here. The ghost, or it says the ghost better choose wisely. If they choose a PC, they better make sure it's the PC the party likes. Even if they don't, even if they choose a PC that the party secretly hates, well, this also makes for an interesting situation, because what's going to happen when all of a sudden the party turns on that PC and is like, well, we didn't never really like them anyway. We're not going to stop doing lethal damage. That's going to create a schism in the party. Now, again, I will say that one flaw in my strategy here is that some tables don't like PvP. They don't like player versus player combat. And that is okay. So again, that's where you then would have the ghost possess some more beloved NPC, somebody that the characters care about theoretically. So again, it comes down to what's okay at your table and what your players are all right with. Let's hear. Ben Elder says, I like that. The party possession as well. Your fighter, for example, starts crying out, what have you done to her? Yeah, 100%. You could do that. Mr. Beck says, have it possess the healer. Yeah, you can have it possess the wizard too and cast fireball on everybody. You could, they're not at that level yet at this particular point in the adventure, but yeah, you could get really creative with that kind of thing. They possess the barbarian and goes into a rage. So it gives you a lot of options. And if you've got a table that is okay with PvP, it also puts them in a situation where you can say, hey, so and so, your character is possessed. It is now wants to attack the party, and have them all roll and fight it out, and have the player make all the tactical decisions for the ghost and that kind of thing, and have a moment where they have kind of a PvP battle royale kind of deal that they run all themselves for the most part, and you just kind of sit back and watch and enjoy the show. it can be a lot of fun with particular groups. Um, Mr. Mex says have a goblin possesses. I'm sorry, have the ghost possess a small goblin named Urk who just wants to make pottery. Uh, uh, you're never gonna let me live that emotional trauma down, are you? Um, for those of you who are not here for our Lost Might of Phandelver game, the party was fighting the party that Mr. Mex is in, his character is in, was fighting a group of goblins, and the bard in that group is a big fan of sort of questioning whenever she casts vicious mockery, questioning the life choices of the various enemies that she's fighting, and she was drilling deep into this goblin boss about is this what he always wanted to be, a marauder? Or did he have hopes and dreams? And the and so on a whim, I decided that after having failed the save for vicious mockery, that this goblin boss Urk was going to whisper, "I always wanted to be a potter." And didn't think about the fact that the moment I did, it would humanize this creature, and the party would try to save him at all costs. Um, so be careful what you say in game, kids. All I'm saying. Um, let's see here. Brittany and Shutters with the flashbacks, the fireball comment. Yeah, another another time that we've worked in that Lost Mine of Phandelver. Let's see here. Ben Elder says maybe finally have use for the 50 feet of rope that have been used till now. Yeah. Terrific. Okay, so I think we've got one here for the widow, because we've got a ghost that kind of complicates things. We've got an angry mob for the priest. What are we going to do for the bard? What are we going to do for the bard? Ooh. Okay. So, this is inspired somewhat by an episode of Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. It's one where with Jay Leno in it, he has a story he talks about that at one point he had been contacted by I think Frank Sinatra's group, somebody I forget, but somebody vaguely connected to the mafia. And they had asked him to do a gig, and he was busy, and so he declined it. And he gets a call back later on, and it turns out that these connected guys had called the gig that had booked him and convinced them to release his contract so that they could hire him for the night, right? So what if we kind of end up in a situation where this bard has made some deals with some shady folks, all in the name of trying to advance their fame and what have you. And now that they can't sing, they are on, they're on the outs with these people. Because they had a contract, they had a deal coming up, a gig, or perhaps the bar didn't know about it, but they were planning on hiring him for something, or having him play for something, and now their boss, who loves this bard, wants them to get this voice back because this is the guy who's got to perform. And so we could have a group of thugs who try to ambush the party at night or something along those lines, to get this voice back. Some other ideas here. Mr. Mex says the bard can have a tavern owner pissed off because he lost his money maker, and the tavern is suffering from the lack of clientele. Now his main attraction is gone. 100%. Yeah, definitely within the same kind of lines. In fact, let's go with that one there. Let's, instead of creating a whole underworld kind of element here, we kind of wanted one with our initial idea of this underground town that we named Sodden Earth here. So let's mix and match. Let's take both ideas and let's blend them. Let's say the tavern where the bard normally performs is frequently host to an underworld gang boss who has become particularly fond of the bard and their singing. When the bard gives up their voice, the tavern owner realizes it will upset this gang boss and sends some local thugs to waylay the party and get the voice back. Let's see here. Mr. Mex says tavern owner could potentially owe some bad people money and now he can't pay them now. Yeah, absolutely. We could weave that into this for sure. And then adds a cool little element there too that perhaps the party could resolve this without combat and just pay off the debt for this tavern owner, which might increase their reputation too. Might sort of make them more local heroes and that kind of deal. So let's work that in here too. I like that. Tavern owner resolves so the gang boss. Whom he owes money to. Cool. We can work that in. Nice little lever. Always fun to have those little levers in there. Those are good. Ben Elder says had an idea for a crime fiction. The drowned, usually petty thugs, but the higher ups all look pale and have sea blue eyes and fathomless warlock abilities. Yeah, 100% you could do that. That'd be cool. That'd be very cool. You know what? Maybe we'll work them as a faction into this world. That's a neat idea. That's a really neat idea. Cool. All right, everybody. So we are at the end of our session here. So why don't we go ahead and wrap things up? We have come up with some very cool complications for what we have here. We want to polish this up with a few mechanics and define some of these encounters for ourselves a little bit so that we've got something to kind of run with. But we're pretty darn close to finishing up this this social encounter. We just need to define what happens on the return, i.e., the reward, and then do some probably some world building to kind of set the stage of the arrival and what the characters see when they get to this atoll where the siren lives. All stuff we could probably bang out at our next session here. If not, we'll definitely have it done by the end of Monday next week, I would think. All right, so thank you again so much for joining me. If you enjoy this content, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. All that stuff helps the channel grow, helps us get more people in the chat, come up with more ideas, and keep everything as dynamic as it has been. If you want to jump into one of my tables and enjoy some of my adventures with me as your DM, please check me out at startplaying.games/GM/RJ Kerr. My available tables are up currently, but I also am open to custom work. So if you're not seeing something that fits what you're looking for, whether that's the time or the style or the game or the module, or you want something that's homebrew, I am open to all that kind of stuff. Just hit that schedule session button and we can talk about all that. With that being said, thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you all at our usual time on Wednesday. Talk to everybody soon. Bye now.